I still remember the exact moment everything inside me shifted. It wasn't loud. There was no dramatic argument, no slammed doors. Just a sentence, casual, careless, that landed heavier than anything I had ever carried in my life. She won't last much longer anyway. It's pointless wasting money on her. My daughter didn't whisper it. She didn't even lower her voice. She said it like she was talking about replacing old furniture. I sat there at the table, hands folded neatly in my lap, staring at the plate I had spent hours preparing. Roast chicken, her favorite. Garlic potatoes, just the way my son liked. Fresh pie cooling by the window. No one had touched it. No one noticed. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I was still alive, but to them, I was already gone. I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because I refused to let them see me break. Inside, something cracked quietly like glass under pressure. 63 years. That's how long I had lived. And never, not once, had I felt as invisible as I did sitting at my own dining table, surrounded by the people I raised. The house was too quiet after that. Even while they argued about money, even while they discussed my future, as if I wasn't sitting right there. "We should sell the house quickly," my daughter said, scrolling through her phone. "The market's good right now." "And then what?" my younger son asked, though he avoided looking at me. "She can go somewhere comfortable. A care facility. Nothing fancy, just practical." Practical. That word echoed in my head. I had been practical my entire life. Practical when my husband lost his job and I worked double shifts to keep us afloat. Practical when I skipped vacations so my kids could go to college. Practical when I sold my jewelry to help my son start a business that failed within a year. And now I was being managed. Like a problem. Like a burden. "What do you think, Mom?" The question came too late. They had already decided. Still, I lifted my head slowly and spoke, keeping my voice steady. "I think we could split the money. I don't need much. Just enough for a small place." Silence. Then a laugh, sharp and cold. "And what happens when that runs out?" my daughter said. "We're back to taking care of you anyway." Taking care of me. I almost laughed, but I didn't, because suddenly I understood something I had been avoiding for years. They didn't see me as their mother anymore. They saw me as an expense. As they stood up, gathering their things, already moving on with their lives, I stayed seated. No one helped clear the table. No one thanked me for dinner. No one even said goodbye properly. The door closed behind them, and the house fell into a silence so deep it almost rang in my ears. I sat there for a long time, long enough for the food to go cold, long enough for the truth to settle. Then I stood up, slowly, carefully, not because I was weak, but because I was thinking, really thinking, for the first time in years. I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about me. That night, I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, I walked through the house, touching things. The walls, the staircase railing, the kitchen counter worn smooth from decades of use. Every corner held a memory. But for the first time, those memories didn't feel comforting. They felt like proof. Proof of everything I had given, and everything I had lost. I stopped in the study. My husband's desk was still there, exactly as he left it. He had always handled the paperwork, the decisions, the serious things. After he passed, I learned, slowly, quietly, without anyone noticing. I opened the drawer and took out a stack of blank paper. Then I sat down. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from something new. Resolve. I wrote 3 letters. One for each of my children. Not angry. Not emotional. Just honest. Simple words. Clear decisions. No explanations they could twist. No guilt they could ignore. When I finished, I sealed each envelope carefully. For a moment, I held them in my hands. 3 lives I had built. 3 people who no longer saw me. All right, I whispered into the empty room. Then I smiled again. But this time it was real. Because something had changed. Not in them. In me. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Habit. Or maybe purpose. The house felt different. Not smaller. Not emptier. Just temporary. I made coffee and stepped outside, watching the sky slowly turn gold. For years, mornings had been rushed, busy, filled with tasks. Now there was nothing to rush toward. And for the first time in my life, that felt like freedom. I already knew what I was going to do. I had been thinking about it all night. Every detail, every step. They thought I was weak, forgetful, dependent. They were wrong, completely wrong. And soon, they would understand exactly how wrong they were. I took a slow sip of coffee and looked at the house one more time. Not yet, I said quietly. I'm not done. The letters were delivered before noon. I didn't watch the mailbox, didn't wait by the window like some anxious woman hoping for approval. Instead, I went about my morning calmly, almost methodically, as if nothing unusual was happening, because in a way, nothing was. The decision had already been made. The moment my daughter dismissed me like an outdated object, everything that followed became inevitable. By the time the phone started ringing, I was ready. The first call was from my eldest. Of course it was. She didn't leave space for interpretation in life, and apparently not in reactions either. I let it ring, then again, then again. After the 4th attempt, I muted the phone and poured myself another cup of coffee. I wasn't avoiding her. I was choosing the timing. That was new for me. Choosing. It felt unfamiliar, almost rebellious, and yet deeply natural. Like something I had always been meant to do, but never allowed myself. Instead of answering, I got dressed and left the house. I had an appointment, not a social one, not something trivial, something important, something that would quietly reshape everything they thought they controlled. The office was modest, tucked between a bakery and a travel agency. I had passed it dozens of times over the years, but had never gone in alone. My husband used to handle things like this: legal matters, contracts, decisions. I used to sit beside him, nodding, trusting. Today, I walked in by myself. "Good morning, Harper," he said, looking up with mild surprise. Daniel had known us for years. He had seen me mostly as someone's wife. Today, he looked at me a little differently, perhaps because I carried myself differently. "I need to make some changes," I said, placing my bag on the chair and sitting down without hesitation. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, tell me." And I did. I explained everything clearly, without rushing, without apologizing. The house, the sale, the distribution, the conditions. Not once did my voice shake. Not once did I second-guess myself. It was as if something inside me had aligned overnight, like a compass finally pointing in the right direction after years of spinning. Daniel leaned back in his chair when I finished. "That's quite a shift," he said carefully. "Are you certain?" "Yes."
No hesitation.
No doubt. That seemed to settle it. He adjusted his glasses and began outlining the process. What needed to be signed, what could be arranged immediately, what would take time. Legal language filled the room, but this time I followed every word. I asked questions, clarified details, took notes. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just present. I was in control. When I left the office, the air felt different. Or maybe I did. The world hadn't changed, but my place in it had. My phone had 15 missed calls. I smiled. Then I turned it back on. It rang almost instantly. "Mom, what is this letter?" My daughter's voice came sharp, tight, already accusing. Good afternoon, I replied calmly.
Don't do that, she snapped.
What do you mean you're handling your own affairs? What is going on? I mean exactly what I wrote.
A pause.
I could almost hear her recalibrating, trying to regain control of a situation she suddenly didn't understand. You don't make decisions like this without discussing them with us. I just did. Silence again, but heavier this time. You're not thinking clearly, she said finally, her tone shifting into something almost clinical. This isn't like you. You're right, I said. It's not. And for the first time since the conversation began, I felt something close to satisfaction. Because she wasn't wrong. This wasn't like me. This was better. We're coming over, she said abruptly. All of us. Tonight. That won't be necessary. It wasn't a suggestion. I almost laughed. That tone. That certainty. I had spent years responding to it. Obeying it, even. Not anymore. I won't be home, I said. Another pause. This one sharper, edged with disbelief. What do you mean you won't be home? I have plans. That wasn't entirely true, but it didn't matter. Because for once, my time didn't belong to them. You're avoiding us. No, I said quietly. I'm prioritizing myself. The line went silent. Then she hung up. I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, heart beating steadily, not racing, not panicking. Just steady. That was new too. I spent the rest of the day putting things in motion. The realtor I chose wasn't one of her polished, overpriced connections. He was efficient, direct, and most importantly, he listened to me. We walked through the house together, discussing pricing, timing, presentation. He made suggestions, but he didn't override me. That alone made him the right choice. By evening, the listing was ready. Photos taken. Details finalized. The house, the center of my entire adult life, was officially on the market. I expected to feel something dramatic. Sadness. Nostalgia. Regret. Instead, I felt light, as if something heavy had been quietly removed from my shoulders without me noticing exactly when it happened. When I returned home, the answering machine was blinking. 5 messages. All from them. Different tones, same theme. Confusion. Frustration. Control slipping through their fingers. I didn't listen to them right away. Instead, I walked into the dining room. The same table. The same chairs. But it felt like a different place now. Because I was no longer the same person sitting at it. Eventually, I pressed play. Their voices filled the room one after another. Questions, demands, assumptions. Not one of them asked how I felt. Not one. I turned it off halfway through the last message. That told me everything I needed to know. Later that night, I sat at the desk again, reviewing documents, making lists, planning the next steps. Bank accounts, personal belongings, logistics. Piece by piece, I was reclaiming my life. Not dramatically, not loudly, but completely. At one point, I caught my reflection in the dark window. For a second, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked calm, focused, almost powerful. I tilted my head slightly, studying her. Where have you been? I murmured. No answer, of course, but I didn't need one, because I already knew. She had always been there, waiting, and now she was finally in charge. By the 3rd day, everything was moving faster than even I had expected. The house was no longer just an idea on paper. It was being seen, evaluated, imagined by strangers. People walked through rooms filled with my memories and saw possibilities instead. New furniture, different colors, a future that didn't include me. And strangely, that didn't hurt. Not anymore. If anything, it felt like watching a story reach its natural ending, the final chapter closing exactly when it was supposed to. I kept myself busy, not out of avoidance, but because there was finally something worth doing. Sorting through decades of accumulated life turned out to be both exhausting and clarifying. Every drawer, every shelf held pieces of a version of me that no longer existed. Old birthday cards and used kitchen gadgets, carefully folded tablecloths I had saved for special occasions that never came. I realized how much of my life had been postponed for a later that never arrived. There was no later anymore. Only now. I made 3 piles. Keep, sell, donate. The keep pile was the smallest. That surprised me at first, but the longer I worked, the more it made sense. I didn't need most of what I had spent years protecting. The objects had outlived their meaning. What I needed now wasn't tied to things, it was tied to freedom. My phone rang again sometime in the afternoon. This time it was my middle son. I answered. "Hey, Mom," he said, hesitant, like he wasn't sure what version of me would respond. "Hello," I replied, neutral but not cold. There was a pause. I could almost hear him choosing his words carefully. "We stopped by yesterday. You weren't there." "I know." Another pause. "You've been busy." "Yes." That seemed to throw him off. He wasn't used to short answers from me. I had always filled silence, smoothed conversations, made things easier for them. Now I let the quiet exist. "Claire's really upset," he said finally. "I imagine she is. She thinks someone's influencing you." I let out a small breath. Not quite a laugh, but close. "No one is influencing me. She says this isn't like you." "She's right." That again. It hung between us. "She's talking about legal options," he added, more carefully now. That caught my attention, but not in the way he expected. "Legal options for what?" "To make sure everything is handled properly." I sat down slowly, processing that. Not shock. Not anger. Just clarity. "Everything is being handled properly," I said. "Yeah, but..." "The house is in my name," I continued calmly. "Every decision I'm making is legal." He didn't argue, because he knew it was true. "I'm just trying to help," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. And I meant it. He wasn't like his sister. He followed more than he led. But that didn't make him innocent. It just made him quieter. "Can we meet?" he asked. "Not yet." "Why not?" Because I wasn't ready to step back into that version of myself. Because I knew how easily old patterns could pull me in. Because this fragile, growing independence needed space to solidify. "I have things to finish," I said instead. Another pause. "Okay," he said finally. "Just don't shut us out completely." I didn't answer that. Because I didn't know yet. After the call, I sat there for a while, staring at nothing in particular. It would have been easy to feel guilty.
To soften.
To explain. But I didn't. Not this time. Because guilt had been the language of my entire life. And I was finally learning a new one. The next morning, something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a brief second, I wondered if it was them. If they had decided to show up uninvited, forcing a confrontation I wasn't ready for. But when I looked through the window, I saw a young couple instead. They stood close together, slightly nervous, slightly hopeful. I opened the door. "Hi," the woman said quickly. "I'm sorry to bother you. We saw your house listed, and we were in the area." Her hand rested unconsciously on her stomach. She was pregnant. "We know we're supposed to go through the agent," the man added, "but we just wanted to see it in person." I hesitated for a moment, not because I didn't want to let them in, but because I suddenly understood something. This house wasn't mine anymore. Not really. It was already becoming someone else's beginning. "All right," I said, stepping aside.
Come in.
They moved through the house slowly, carefully, like they didn't want to disturb anything. unlike my children, who had walked through it as if it were already theirs. The difference was striking. "This kitchen is beautiful," the woman said softly. "It's been used a lot," I replied. She smiled. "That's how you can tell." We moved from room to room, and without planning to, I started telling them stories. Small ones, harmless ones, nothing too personal, but enough to give the house a heartbeat. The man listened attentively. The woman looked at everything like she was already placing her life inside it. In the backyard, they stopped. "It feels warm here," she said. I looked around. Same trees, same fence,
Same space.
but somehow she was right. "It was," I said. She turned to me. "And now?"
I thought about that.
About everything that had changed in just a few days. About the woman I had been and the one I was becoming. "Now it's ready for something new." She nodded, as if she understood more than I had said. After they left, the house felt different again. Not emptier,
Just released.
like it had fulfilled its purpose. I went inside and sat at the desk. For a moment, I did nothing. Then I opened a notebook. A blank page. I stared at it. For years, I had filled lists for other people. Groceries, appointments, responsibilities. Now, there was only one question. What did I want? The answer didn't come immediately. But for the first time, that didn't scare me. Because I finally had the time to find out. The offer came sooner than expected. 3 days after the listing went live, my agent called early in the morning, his voice carrying a note of contained excitement. "You might want to sit down," he said. I was already sitting, a cup of coffee in my hands, watching the pale light stretch across the floor. "We've got a strong offer."
Clean. No complications.
And he paused slightly. "It's from the couple who visited you." I didn't need him to say their names. I knew. For a moment, I said nothing, just letting the information settle. It wasn't the highest possible price. I understood that immediately. There were better financial strategies, longer waits, chances to push the number higher. My daughter would have insisted on that. She would have turned it into a negotiation, a performance, a game of squeezing every last dollar out of strangers. But this didn't feel like a game to me. It felt like a decision. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think," I said slowly, "they should have the house." He hesitated. "You're sure? We could wait. There's interest building." I'm sure. And I was. Not because I didn't understand the value of money, but because I finally understood the value of something else. Timing. Intuition.
Choice.
I wasn't making decisions based on fear anymore, or on maximizing approval, or on what someone else would consider smart. I was making them based on what felt right for me. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. By midday, the paperwork was in motion. By evening, the house was officially under contract. It was done. I expected the finality of that moment to hit me harder, to feel like loss, like something irreversible slipping away. But instead, what I felt was clarity, a clean break, not from the house itself, but from everything it represented. Years of routine, of putting others first, of quietly shrinking myself to fit into roles that had long outgrown me. The phone started ringing again not long after. This time, I answered. "How much?" my daughter demanded immediately, skipping any form of greeting. I told her. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "That's below market," she said, her voice rising. "Why would you accept that?" "Because I chose to." "That's not an answer." "It is for me." "You just gave away money," she snapped. "Do you understand that? That affects all of us." There it was again. All of us. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the quiet street. "No," I said calmly. "It affects me." Silence. Then, colder this time, That house was our inheritance. I almost smiled. Interesting, I said. I wasn't aware I had passed away.
She didn't like that.
I could hear it in the way she exhaled sharply, searching for control, for footing. You're being irrational.
No, irrablia.
I'm being clear. You're not thinking about the future. I am thinking about the future, I said.
Me.
Another pause, heavier now. And what about us? She asked. That question lingered longer than the others. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted to choose the right one. You're adults, I said finally. You'll figure it out. She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Unbelievable. Yes, I agreed quietly. It is. She hung up. I set the phone down gently. No shaking hands. No racing heart. Just stillness. That evening, I prepared dinner. For one. It felt strange at first, not sad, just unfamiliar. I had spent decades cooking for others, adjusting meals to preferences, timing everything around schedules that weren't mine. Now, there was no pressure.
No expectations.
I made something simple, ate slowly, left the dishes in the sink a little longer than necessary. There was no one to judge that. Later, I walked through the house again, not as its keeper, but as someone passing through. Rooms echoed slightly differently when you knew you were leaving them. Not louder, not emptier, just detached. I paused in the doorway of what used to be my bedroom and looked around. The walls were bare now, the closet half empty, the bed neatly made, like a space already preparing to belong to someone else. I didn't linger. Instead, I moved to the living room and sat down. For a long time, I just sat there, thinking, not about the past, not even about my children, but about what came next. That was the part no one had asked me. Not once. Where will you go?
What do you want?
What kind of life do you actually choose when no one is choosing it for you? The answers weren't fully formed yet, but they were starting to take shape. Small ideas at first, then clearer images. A place smaller than this house. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere new. Not because I was running away, but because I was finally allowed to arrive somewhere on my own terms. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my youngest son. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. Hey, he said, softer than the others. I heard about the house. I assumed you would. There was a pause. Are you okay? That question stopped me. Not because it was complicated, but because it was the first time anyone had asked it. I am, I said. You sure? Yes. Another pause. Claire's not taking it well. I know. She thinks you're making a mistake. I know that too. He exhaled quietly. I don't think you are. That surprised me. I didn't say anything right away. I think, he continued, choosing his words carefully, you're just doing something we don't understand yet. I looked down at my hands, at how steady they were. That's probably true, I said. Can I ask you something? Of course. Where are you going to go? There it was. The question no one else had asked. And the answer came easier than I expected. I don't know yet, I said. But that's the point. He was quiet for a second. Then, softly. Okay.
No argument. No correction.
Just acceptance. We spoke a little longer about nothing important, and somehow that made it more meaningful. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while when it came to my children. Not obligation. Not tension. Just possibility. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because everything was resolved, but because, for the first time, my life was finally mine. The closing happened quietly. No dramatic final moment. No emotional farewell at the front door. No lingering glance over my shoulder as I walked away. Just signatures, documents, a set of keys placed into someone else's hands. And with that, A chapter of my life ended in the most ordinary way possible. I found that strangely fitting. After all, most of my life had been built on ordinary days, not grand turning points. It made sense that leaving it behind would feel the same. The young couple, Emily and Daniel, stood close together as everything was finalized. I watched them from across the room, noticing the way they exchanged glances, small smiles, quiet excitement they were trying to contain. I recognized that look. I had worn it once, many years ago, when everything still felt like it was ahead of me. "This home means a lot," Emily said softly as she approached me afterward. "We'll take good care of it." "I know you will," I replied.
And I meant it.
There was no regret in handing over the keys.
No hesitation.
If anything, there was a sense of completion, like placing the last piece in a puzzle that had been unfinished for too long. The house had done its job. It had held my life when I needed stability. Now it was time for it to hold someone else's. When I walked out of the building, I didn't go back. That was intentional. No final visit.
No unnecessary nostalgia.
Some doors, once closed, don't need to be reopened just to confirm they're shut. I moved into a small furnished apartment on the edge of a coastal town 3 days later. It wasn't a place I had planned years in advance. There was no childhood dream tied to it, no emotional history pulling me there. I chose it simply because it felt right. It was quiet, slightly imperfect, and completely mine. The windows overlooked the water, and in the mornings, the light came in soft and steady, not harsh or demanding. The first night, I sat on the floor with a cup of tea, surrounded by unopened boxes, and listened to the sound of waves in the distance. It felt unfamiliar and perfect. My children reacted exactly as expected when they received their money. Confusion first, then disbelief, then anger. "This is it?" my daughter asked when I handed her the envelope, her eyes scanning the number as if it might change if she looked long enough. "This is it," I confirmed. "That's not even close to what we discussed." "We didn't discuss anything," I said calmly. "You decided. I executed." She didn't like that. None of them did. My middle son tried to approach it logically, asking questions about the remaining funds, about plans, about long-term security. My youngest stayed quieter, watching more than speaking, processing in his own way. "What about the rest?" my daughter pressed. "The rest is mine." The simplicity of that answer seemed to frustrate her more than anything else. "You're being selfish." That word again. It used to terrify me. Now, it barely registered. "No," I said. "I'm being responsible for myself. You've never been like this." "I know. And what happens when you need help?" she demanded. I met her gaze steadily. "I'll ask for it." That ended the conversation faster than anything else could have, because for the first time, I wasn't speaking from fear, and they didn't know how to argue with that. The following weeks were quiet, not lonely, just quiet. There's a difference I hadn't understood before. Loneliness comes from absence. Quiet comes from peace. I was beginning to experience the second for the first time in decades. I developed routines, not out of obligation, but out of choice. Morning walks by the water. Coffee at a small cafe, where no one knew my history, only my name. Even that felt new. Being known simply as Harper. Not someone's mother. Not someone's wife. Just me. I started noticing things I had ignored for years. The way light changes throughout the day. The rhythm of people moving without urgency. The simple satisfaction of doing something because I wanted to, not because it was expected. One afternoon, almost without thinking, I walked into a small art studio. I don't know what drew me in. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something deeper I hadn't yet put into words. Inside, the space smelled faintly of paint and wood. Canvases leaned against the walls. A few people sat quietly, working on their own projects, completely absorbed. No one looked up immediately. No one asked who I was or why I was there. And for some reason that felt right. First time, a woman asked gently after a moment, setting down her brush. Yes, I admitted. She smiled, not in a welcoming, overwhelming way, but in a quiet, understanding one. Good, she said. That's the best time. I didn't know what she meant exactly, but I stayed. I picked up a brush. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, I did something with no purpose beyond simply doing it.
No outcome. No expectation.
No one to please.
Just movement. Color.
Time passing without pressure. When I left the studio later that day, something inside me felt different again. Not dramatically, not overwhelmingly, but noticeably. Like a door had opened somewhere I hadn't realized was closed. My phone rang that evening. I knew who it was before I answered. Hey, my youngest son said.
E.
How are you? Good. You sound different. I am. He was quiet for a moment. In a good way, he added. Yes, I said. In a very good way. We talked longer than usual that night. About small things. About his work. About the place I had moved to, though I still didn't give him exact details. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I wasn't ready to have my new life fully connected to the old one just yet. Claire still doesn't understand, he said eventually. I know. Michael's trying to. That didn't surprise me. And you? I asked. He hesitated. I think you did something I'm not brave enough to do yet. That stayed with me long after we ended the call. Because maybe that was what this really was. Not rebellion. Not escape. But courage. The kind that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. The kind that happens quietly, one decision at a time. The kind that changes everything. That night, I sat by the window, watching the reflection of the moon on the water. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I had gained, and more importantly, what was still possible. My 65th birthday didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. I woke up before the alarm, not out of habit this time, but because I wanted to. The room was filled with soft morning light, the kind that doesn't rush you out of bed, but gently invites you into the day. For a moment, I just lay there, listening to the quiet. No obligations waiting.
No expectations pressing.
Just space. That still amazed me. I got up slowly, made coffee, and stepped out onto the small balcony. The ocean stretched out in front of me, calm and endless, like it had all the time in the world, and for the first time, I felt like I did too. I wasn't counting years anymore. I wasn't measuring what was left. I was simply living. There was a small package on the table. I frowned slightly, certain I hadn't ordered anything. The wrapping was simple, tied with a thin ribbon. No sender name on the outside. I sat down, curious, and opened it carefully. Inside was a notebook, leather-bound, smooth, untouched. On the first page, a message was written in neat, slightly uneven handwriting. For everything you haven't written yet.
No signature.
But I had a feeling I knew exactly who it was from. The woman from the art studio, the one who had told me that the first time was the best time. She had a way of saying things that stayed with you, settling quietly until they made sense. I ran my fingers over the blank pages. For most of my life, my story had been written around me, defined by roles, shaped by responsibilities, directed by expectations I never questioned. Now, for the first time, there was space to write something of my own. And I didn't feel pressure. I felt possibility. My phone buzzed. A message. Happy birthday, Mom. I hope you're somewhere that makes you happy. My youngest. I smiled. I am, I replied. A moment later, another message came through. I started that job I told you about. It's actually good. You'd like it. I already do. I typed back. Then, after a pause, proud of you. 3 words I had said countless times in my life, but this time they felt different. Not automatic, not expected, just true. Another message appeared from my middle son. Happy birthday. I signed up for classes. I read it twice. Then, once more, a slow warmth spread through me. That makes me very happy, I wrote. It wasn't a long conversation. It didn't need to be, because something had shifted, not just in me, but in them too. Slowly, imperfectly, but noticeably. There was only one silence left, and I knew it would come eventually. I just didn't know when. I spent the rest of the morning walking along the shore. The air was cool, the sand still damp from the night tide. I moved slowly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to notice everything. The sound of waves folding into themselves, the distant call of birds, the steady rhythm of my own steps. At some point, I realized something simple but profound. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for approval, not for permission, not for someone else to decide what came next. I had already stepped into my life, fully. When I returned home, there was a car parked near the entrance. Not unfamiliar, not expected either. I stopped for a moment, then continued walking. The door opened before I reached it. She stepped out slowly. My daughter. For a second, we just looked at each other. She seemed different. Less sharp, less guarded. Still strong, but not armored in the same way. Happy birthday, she said. Her voice was steady, but quieter than I remembered. Thank you, I replied.
No tensión.
No immediate conflict. Just space. I wasn't sure if I should come, she admitted after a moment. But you did. Yes. We stood there a little longer, the silence no longer uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. I brought something, she said, holding out a small package. I took it. Do you want to come in? I asked. She nodded. Inside, she looked around slowly, taking in the space. This is nice, she said. It is. She turned to me. You look different. I am. She almost smiled at that. We sat down across from each other, the package still in my hands. Open it, she said. Inside was a photograph. Old. Faded slightly at the edges. It took me a moment to recognize it. Me, much younger, laughing, pushing her on a swing. Her face frozen in that perfect childhood moment between fear and joy. I found it when I was going through some things, she said quietly. I didn't even know we still had this, I replied. I didn't either. I looked at the photo longer than I expected to. Not with regret. Not with longing. Just recognition. That was a good day, I said. Yes, she agreed. Another pause. Then she took a breath. I was wrong. Simple.
Direct.
No defense.
No justification.
That mattered more than anything else she could have said. I know, I replied gently. She looked at me, surprised, but not offended. I said things I shouldn't have, she continued. I thought I was being practical. I thought I was helping. But really, I just didn't want things to change. Change is difficult, I said. I thought I was losing you, she admitted. I held her gaze. You weren't losing me, I said. You just didn't recognize who I was becoming. That seemed to land. She nodded slowly. I think I understand that now. We talked for a long time after that. Not about money. Not about the house. Not about control. About things that actually mattered.
Fear.
Expectations. The strange way roles can trap you without you noticing. For the first time in years, we weren't arguing. We were listening. At some point, she said something that stayed with me. You didn't leave us, she said. You just stopped disappearing inside our lives. I smiled slightly. That's a good way to put it. When she left later that afternoon, nothing dramatic happened.
Noi mouschen el budie. No promises.
Just something quiet and real. A beginning. Again. That evening, I returned to the balcony with my notebook. The one with blank pages. The one that didn't expect anything from me except honesty. I opened it, sat for a moment, then began to write. Not about the past, not about what had been taken or given, but about now, about who I was, about what I wanted. And for the first time, the words felt like they truly belonged to me. I paused, looking out at the horizon, where the sky met the water in a line that seemed both distant and endless. I smiled, because I finally understood something I had spent a lifetime missing. It wasn't too late. It had never been too late. I had just been waiting. And now, I wasn't waiting anymore.